This is a message from Hounslow Town Church. We meet every Sunday at 9:45 in the Treaty Center on Hounslow High Street. For more information and resources, please visit us at hounslowtownchurch.org.
As a way of introduction, what would happen if Jesus got involved in your business? What would happen when Jesus got involved in your business? Many years ago, I met someone who wished that Jesus had been involved in his business from the very start. I met this man on the street in Southall. He had purchased a restaurant actually right here in Hounslow. The man was a Christian, and he asked me and he really begged me if I would pray for his business and if I would come to it so that I could pray for it, and of course so that I could become his customer. And I did all those things. And here's why he asked me to do all those things. When he had bought the business from the previous owner, he thought that he was buying a very successful restaurant business. But instead, the previous owner had cooked the books. He had cooked the books. That means that the previous owner presented the financial records of this business in a fraudulent way. He had presented records that showed that the business was making more money than it actually was. When the man who bought the restaurant had visited the restaurant to see the restaurant in operation before he bought it, the previous owner, he knew when the man would be coming. The previous owner invited all his friends to come and fill the restaurant. He had another friend call the restaurant every several minutes to place an order for takeaway. And so the prospective owner, when he arrived, he saw what he thought was a very booming business, only to learn that when he took possession of it, it wasn't. And the cook who came with the business told this man everything that had happened. What would have happened if Jesus had been involved in the business from the very beginning? What happens when Jesus gets involved in our business? Well, in our passage today that Jesslyn read for us, we see exactly what happens when Jesus gets involved in a business. In this case, he steps into the fishing business, which is why I've entitled the sermon, When Jesus Gets Into Your Business. Now, I need to say right up front, even though I've talked about businesses and owning a business, this sermon is not about that. It's not really about how Jesus can get involved in your working life or your professional life or any businesses that you may be a part of. Rather, what I really mean here is what happens when Jesus gets involved in your life. So if you think of the English phrase, when we say, stay out of my business, what we really say when we say that is stay out of my life, right? And it's in that sense that I want to use the term business, okay? And what we see in our text today is, so this is a way of an outline. We see when Jesus gets involved in our lives, when Jesus gets involved in our business, we see that he does these three things. Firstly, he knows your books better than you. In other words, he knows your true financial estate. He knows who you truly are. He knows you better than you do. Secondly, when he visits, you and I will need to conduct an audit, meaning we will need to examine ourselves. And thirdly, we'll see that he will revolutionize your activities. In other words, he will completely change things all around. All right, so that's where we're going. So first, let's consider what it means that he knows your books better than you do. When Jesus comes into our lives, he knows us better than we are. In other words, if we stay with the business analogy, he knows how to make money better than you do. He knows your business inside and out. He knows how to run things such that they truly become profitable. Now, I say all that figuratively. I think that's all true of our lives. But actually, in terms of our passage, it's actually true. Jesus becomes the better fisherman. And we see this, right? He is a better fishing business manager than Peter ever could be. So let's read the first 7 verses just to drive this point home. Verse 1, on one occasion, when the crowds were pressing in on him to hear the word of God, he was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. And he saw two boats by the lake, but the fishermen had gone out of them and were washing their nets. Getting into one of the boats, which was Simon's, he asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the people from the boat. And when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon answered, "Master, we toiled all night and took nothing. But at your word, I will let down the nets." And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boats to come and help them. And they came and filled both the boats, so they began to sink. Jesus, very clearly here, knows the fishing business better than Simon. And when Simon figures that out, his life is completely changed. You know, up to this point in our story, as we've been reading the Gospel of Luke, we've met Jesus as an incredible preacher. We've met him as a miracle worker. And all the while, people were trying to figure out Jesus. Jesus had become very popular. If they had TikTok at the time, he would certainly be going viral. He'd be trending. If they had the O2, he'd be selling that out, which would mean that it would be very difficult to find a venue to hold all the crowds. And since sound travels across water, it makes sense that Jesus would do what he describes right here. He would go out in a boat so that he could preach to the crowds, which would come down to the shoreline and would be able to hear him. And that's exactly what he does. He preaches the sermon that we read he was preaching in all the villages, which was the sermon of the gospel of the kingdom. And so as a boat as his pulpit, he puts out and he preaches that the good news of God has arrived and that God and his Messiah has come in the person of himself and everything is being put right. And when he finished this sermon, he told Peter to give fishing another go. Peter, give it another chance. But Peter, we see here, wasn't convinced. Peter understood fishing, didn't he? What on earth could this preacher boy possibly know? That's what Peter was thinking, right? Because every fisherman knows that you don't go fishing during the daytime. Fish don't like the sun, right? Fish like the dark. And so the best time to catch fish is at night or in the evening or early in the morning before the sun comes up. But Peter obeys, doesn't he? Peter obeys because while he's not convinced, he knows that Jesus is a teacher. And being a good person from the East, he wants to honor the religious teacher. He doesn't say, as we often say here, "Show me the evidence before I go and do what you tell me to, Jesus." He doesn't say, "Jesus, no one else is doing it. I'm not going to do this." He doesn't say, "That's not what we do around here," or "prove to me that this will work," or anything of this sort. Rather, he calls Jesus his master. He honors him, and he obeys. He puts down the nets. And what happens next in our text should very much shape our understanding of who God is. Think with me, who do you think of God? Is God one who blesses, or is God a reluctant giver? You know, many people think of God as a Scrooge-like figure, as someone who holds back what is best. If you ask many people who actually come from the East, my friend did, and in her religion, she had to ring a bell in order just to get God's attention. And she was taught that she had to say many prayers in order just to have the hope that God might even hear the prayer, let alone even think about answering it. See, her view of God was far away, didn't care, and wouldn't even give the best. Look at what we see here. How different is this view of God's? The one true and living God. Look at what he does. He doesn't hold back. With him, there is abundance. The nets are bursting. Things are flourishing. It was great that we sang that song before, Flourishing, because that's the picture here. He gives these guys a catch of a lifetime. And Peter knew right away, he knew his Bible. He knew right away who he was dealing with in the person of Jesus. Psalm 23:1, famous psalm, says this: "The Lord God, Yahweh, is my shepherd. I shall not want." Simon Peter knew right away that he was not dealing with just some ordinary Bible teacher. He was not dealing with some ordinary prophet. This was not just some miracle worker. He's in the presence of the one true and living God, Jesus, truly fully God, truly fully man. And that one had showed up in Peter's business. And so Peter does what anyone would do, what we all do when God shows up in your business, when he shows up in your life. He conducts an audit of himself. When you meet God, you then right away need to know who you are. You need to take an inventory of your life. You need to take stock of your life. And Peter does that, just that in verse 8. But when Simon Peter saw it, when he saw what God had done, he fell down at Jesus' knees. He's worshiping him, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." The right response, the only response when faced with the holiness of God, is to confess your sinfulness. The Old Testament reading, the reason I chose that passage from Isaiah was that the two stories are very similar in many ways. Isaiah in verse 5, when he meets God in the temple, he says something very similar to what Peter says. Verse 5, it says, "Woe is me," Isaiah says, "Woe is me, for I am lost. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, God, the Lord of hosts." Peter now says something similar. "Depart from me. Get away from me, for I'm a sinful man. Oh Lord, oh God." He's saying, get away from me. Jesus, get away from me, God, for I'm not worthy to be in your presence. I've sinned. I've rebelled from you. I've seen things which I should not have seen. I've said things from my lips which I should not have said. My lips are unclean. I've thought things which I should not have thought. I've done things which I should not have done. Woe is me, for I am lost. Depart from me, for I am a sinful man. John Calvin, pastor, theologian, writing some 400 years ago, famously wrote this. He said that no one ever attains clear knowledge of himself, herself, unless he or she has first gazed upon the Lord. He's saying if you want to know who you truly are, if you want to know yourself, you need to first look at God. To know who you are, you need to look at God. And when you look at God and you see his sovereignty, which means he rules over all things, and you see his holiness, meaning there is no one else like him, and you see his righteousness, such that you understand that he always does what is right and he always does what he says. And you see his justice, knowing that he's going to put everything right that is wrong. And you realize that this holy God is your judge. The right response is what Isaiah says. woe is me. The right response is what Peter says. I need to get away from you. You're not safe. You're an unsafe person. I need to get away. Can I ask you, have you, in your journey of faith, in your life of faith, have you ever, can you think of a time in which you've come face to face with the holiness of God, such that you've had an experience like this, such that it breaks you, it undoes you, you no longer feel safe, such that you say, woe is me, a sinner. What hope do I have to be in your presence? I would suggest that if you've not ever had such an experience when you've seen the holiness of God, and you're broken by your own sinfulness, you've wept by your own sinfulness, I would suggest to you, you need to seriously examine your faith. A true Christian knows his sin and is undone by it. A Christian is one who knows the bad state that God found them in and is broken by that. This last Friday, Amy and I were in the city of London, and we did a walking tour put on by this company, a Spanish company actually. They're all over the world now. They're called the Guru Walking Tours. And ours was being led by this Englishman who, in my opinion, hated England. He hated England. I actually think he did. He kept trying to convince himself otherwise. It was very strange. He kept saying, I love England, but blah, 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 right? And he said that so many times. I'm like, mate, you're trying to convince yourself. And what he was doing is he were going through London, part of London, and he was showing us all the bad things that have been done by English people for the last 300-400 years. And only one time did he say anything that good that the English had done. And it was when we were near a church, and he mentioned that it was a church that pushed Parliament led by William Wilberforce to stop the slave trade. And I was actually wondering if he would take us to the actual church of John Newton, who was a part of that whole effort. We didn't go there. You can go there. You can Google where John Newton worshipped. But John Newton is a person we need to know. You probably know his song. But he was a slave owner. He was a slave trader. He's a man who did terrible things in the transatlantic slave trade. Terrible things. But listen to these words of John Newton, who later was saved and who later became a vicar at a church that you can go visit. Listen to these words. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Notice what Jesus does with Peter. Do you hear those same words? Can I ask you, have you experienced this? Where you are undone by your sin, where you recognize that we all like the phrase amazing grace, but can you identify with what Newton says, that saved a wretch like me? I'm sure no one here has been involved in anything as horrific as the transatlantic slave trade. And yet we all have sinned and we've all rebelled. And if God can save someone like that, like Newton, like Peter, like me, he can certainly save any one of us. When faced with the holiness of God, the right response, the godly response is always to confess our sin. And when we do that, thirdly, in closing here, when we do that, we'll see that God, will revolutionize us, meaning he will completely change and transform us. He did that. He very clearly did that with Peter. He did that with Isaiah, as we read that. We know he did that with John Newton, with William Wilberforce. He did that with me. if you have cast yourself on Jesus, he's done that with you. And if you are here today and this is your first time ever in a church, you're saying, God, I need my life to change. Can I encourage you? Cast yourself onto him. Admit your sin, for he will do the same for you. So we see this transformation, verse 10. And Jesus said to Simon, do not be afraid, for now on you will be catching men. There's the transformation. You've been a fisher person. You've been a fisherman. Now you're going to be an ambassador in my kingdom, catching humans. And here's the transformation. Verse 11, and when they had brought their boats to land, they left everything and followed him. They left everything and followed him. What businessman does that? I don't know of one. But there's a transformation that's happening here. This is what is called the transforming power of grace. The grace of God will change and transform you. And I want us to see that. And to see it, let me ask this question. What is the biggest miracle that goes on in this passage? What's the biggest miracle? Is it that the fish, all this huge catch of fish happened in the middle of the day that shouldn't have happened? Is that the bigger miracle? Or is it that there's a sinner named Peter, Simon Peter, who was so transformed by God that he gave it all away and followed Jesus? What's the bigger miracle? The answer is what happened to Peter. It's the transformation that took place in the life of Simon Peter. Jesus becomes everything to Peter, and he's willing to leave it all behind. Jesus, before had been his advisor, before he had been his teacher, before he had offered him advice, and he said, okay, I'll give that a try. But now, Jesus is his Lord. Before he was his counselor, now Peter gives Jesus control over his life. So notice that transformation, right? Peter comes to shore and he leaves it all behind. He leaves behind this huge catch of fish, the biggest catch of fish he's ever had, that he's ever known. And he leaves money on the table. I mean, it's like being at the lottery, right, at the casino and pulling the lever and all these coins come out and you just leave it there. I mean, no one does this unless there's something greater that's going on. Who leaves money at the table? Who leaves the family business? These guys left it all. They left family. They left the money. They left the business. Why? Who does that? They do that because of what Jesus says to them in response to his confession of sin. Listen to these words of grace. Peter admits he's sin. He's a sinner. He says, get away from me. Get away from me. Listen to what Jesus says. Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching men. See, Jesus welcomes Peter, a sinner, and he calls him into this kingdom business, his business of being an ambassador, of making fishers of men. See, Simon Peter found a love now. He found a purpose, which he instantly recognized was worth laying it all down for and giving it all away. That grace of not being cast away, of not being said, no, okay, Peter, yeah, you're a sinner. Go and improve yourself, and then you can come back. Oh, Peter, wash yourself up. Go wash your hands, and then you can come into my presence. Oh, Jesus, Peter, go away and do the right ritual, and then you can come, and maybe you can be useful in me. No, none of that. He's instantly welcomed by grace. See, this is the transforming power of grace. Transforming grace is a grace that says, you are forgiven. that you belong, that you matter, that you're accepted, that you're welcomed, and that you now have a purpose. And that grace has the power to completely change you, to make the most greedy, selfish person into someone who's the most generous possible. That's the transforming power of grace. There are lots of illustrations that I can use, but here's one that I came across in my readings this week. There's a famous sportsman in the 1960s. His name was Bobby Richardson. And Bobby's manager didn't believe in grace. He felt that everyone had to earn their place. And so what he would do to all his best players is he never would tell them that you're my player. He'd always make them beyond their, have to prove themselves, even their best players. And so when one of their best players would have a not so good match, that player the following week was benched. And so his good players never felt welcomed, loved, accepted, affirmed. And they actually didn't play very well, which led to the manager being sacked. New manager comes in. First thing new manager does, says to Bobby Richardson, Bobby, you will play every match. You will always be in. Bobby needed that assurance. Bobby needed someone to say, I believe in you. You belong. You're accepted. Now go perform. You see, grace always precedes performance. It always precedes activity. What happened with Bobby Richardson? His best years by far were after that with this new manager who believed in him, who assured him that he mattered, that he belonged, that he was welcomed. That's the transforming power of grace. And that's exactly what Jesus does to Simon Peter. Responding to Peter's confession of sin, Jesus says to Peter, you are welcomed, and I have work for you. And Simon Peter's life was forever changed. He gave everything away because he had found something that was worth so much more. You see, when Jesus invades your business, when Jesus enters your life, he does so in order to revolutionize you, to transform me, to change us. And that's because he, Jesus, is the answer to all of our dreams, to all of our goals, to all of our desires. He's the answer to every question you and I have ever had, will ever have, or can ever have. This is the transforming power of grace. That when Jesus invades our life, he changes us such that we recognize that he is the one who our hearts have always wanted. And therefore we go and we gladly, willingly, cheerfully serve him and follow him. Would you pray with me?